Hey everyone, and welcome to this special episode of Pixels where I'm going to spoil the entirety of The Last of Us Part 2 and, of course, The Last of Us Part 1. This is going to be. I'm going to do a little bit of non spoilery ish talk at the beginning, but really, if you don't want to, if you haven't played through the game, I would recommend you don't listen to this show unless you really have no intention of playing it ever, or I guess in the next 6 months to a year, because after that, the thing will have been discussed so much that you probably won't be able to avoid the spoilers. So if you're intending on playing it before the end of the year, I would suggest don't listen to this episode until you have. My name is Patrick Beja, and I have a lot of thoughts. This is not going to be an easy episode to do because this subject matter is so complex and evokes so many things. Just for a little bit of context, I adored the first Last of Us, as many people. I thought it was probably the best game ever made. There are a couple of games up there in my best games list, but this is very likely the best game ever created. And it doesn't mean it doesn't have its faults, of course, but overall, the things that it did with the story and the way it made you feel pushed it up to the top for me. Now, the second one was not a given. And of course, as many people have commented and are still commenting now, not every game needs a sequel. Not every game needs to be expanded upon. And especially in this case, where the story was so perfectly complete, it was very understandable that people would be skeptical about the need for another one. And if you were to argue that it actually did not need another one, I could completely understand. But having played through it and having thought about it for a week now, and I'm sure my thinking will evolve over the next weeks and months, but I can understand the value of that second one. As I mentioned, I finished the game a week ago, and I honestly still don't know for sure what I think about it. I just tweeted the fact that when I had just finished it, I wasn't sure how much I liked it. But now, with the benefit of having let it rest a little bit and having thought about it a lot more, I think I like it a lot more than before. And that doesn't necessarily mean I thought it was fun or even enjoyable, which I'll get to in a little bit. But at this stage, I think it might be my game of the year. Of course, the year is far from over, but I think it might be my game of the year, which was 100% not a given when I had just finished it. And I think it's interesting that the first one as well requires you to let it sit for a little bit and think about it and think about what you went through in order to really know how you feel about it, which is not always the case. You know, most games, I would argue, you understand the value of it and the things it brings to you as soon as you're done with them, because the enjoyment is very mechanical. And in this one, much like any great piece of art, the requirements for quote unquote enjoying it are much more cerebral and intellectual. You have to integrate what you've lived through, what you've experienced, and process it in order to understand whether or not you you assign value to that experience. So I'll be talking about this in just a little bit. And the big thing is, of course, the narrative content, the story, and the ride it takes you through. So I'll get to that in a little bit. I just want to mention the kind of trivial aspects of the game, which are things like graphics and gameplay and level design and things like that, which is almost comical to say that they're trivial because all of these things are two-thirds or three-fourths of any other game. in any other game, the main draw is going to be gameplay, but a big part of it is also going to be graphics and the way the game is designed on a game design perspective. And not in this one. In this one, all of this is almost an accessory to the story. So the graphics are, of course, as you've heard, incredible. I don't even think I need to spend too much time on it. The level of detail, the way the levels are constructed, the luxurious flora that is reclaiming the cities. It's mind-blowing what is achieved by this game. It is by far the best-looking console game ever created, I think. And of course, it's a single-player experience, which can focus on increasing the expertise, the expertness of the graphics, but it is still a marvel to look at. So, all right, that's settled. The gameplay is honestly very similar to the first one. I was a little bit taken aback by this. There are some changes, there are some, I don't even want to say improvements, there are changes, but they're minimal. By and large, you feel mostly like you felt in the first one. It's a little bit heightened, there's a little bit of additional options, and you can approach maybe things in slightly different ways, but mostly it's the same as the first one. And if you didn't like the gameplay in the first one, I suspect you're not going to enjoy the gameplay in the second one. I'm not saying it's unenjoyable. I certainly had a good time on the gameplay part. I thought it was valuable. It was valuing my time. Each new arena you would get into was kind of a puzzle stealth action, and it was fun. But it was very much just like the first one in the feelings it would, the gameplay would create. At this point, I do want to mention that both from a gameplay and a overall story, I guess, perspective or importance, the infected are almost in the background. They almost don't matter. They're there, but it is such in the first one, it was really half of the conflict of the game. Half of the action of the game was versus the infected. In this one, it feels like even if maybe the number of encounters are equally divided between infected and humans, it feels like they really don't matter. There are a couple of scenes that you will remember, but it's interesting to note, I think. And also, the latter puzzles are mostly gone. Puzzles are mostly gone, which means the game is, in the first one, it was narrative content, action encounter, and puzzles. In this one, it's mainly narrative content and action encounters, which I think makes it a little bit more intense for better or worse. I think some people might understandably think that it is a little bit too repetitive. So yeah, the level design I think deserves a mention as well. They are still essentially hallways. You always have one exit, one entrance, one exit to every section of the game. You have very little, except for an early part of the game where there is a somewhat open section, but even then you have an open map, and then you go to a place, and in that place you have a hallway type of thing, kind of like in Gears of War 5, where you had that open map, which really wasn't one. That's somewhat similar here. Maybe it's a little bit better integrated, but mostly the level design is hallways. But they managed to disguise this hallway design with much wider areas where you feel like you have more freedom. I think the Uncharted games in general and the first Last of Us felt a lot more like hallways. Here, you feel like you have much more freedom to explore the area and almost feel like you are choosing where you're going to go, where in reality, you're really guided very cleverly through the level design and visual cues to the only exit of that section. So that is a welcome improvement in the level design, even though, of course, it's designed to be very linear. Um, the last couple of questions I'll get into before I talk about the story, which again is going to be the main part of this discussion, is it better or worse than the first one? And as I mentioned, I think I'm going to need to think of it for a long time. But it I think it's not as good as the first one at this point. I think it's very powerful. You know, the first one to me is as good as a game can be. And of course, this is always very personal, but to me, it's as good as a game can be. And this one feels incredible, but maybe it doesn't reach the height of the first one because of that, the weight of that conclusion. But as I mentioned, as I think about it more and more, I feel like what it's achieving is incredibly strong and powerful. So I wouldn't be surprised if down the line, even with my thinking is evolving very quickly, if within a few days I might think, or a few weeks, I might think, well, it's actually as good. Or better, maybe? I don't know. It does many very powerful things. The other question is it fun? Did I like it? Did I enjoy it? It's definitely not fun. Um, it is I it's an experience that is hard, and of course we'll talk about this more. So maybe I can get into it when I'm going to talk about genre. Before I do that, I just want to mention something which is a side note. Thankfully, because I think it wouldn't have been a side note a few years ago. In the story, let's dive into the story. Every main character is a woman. Every character of importance is a woman. And people note it, I think, but it's rarely discussed. And that's not even something I want to discuss here. It's just that I want to note it to say that it's not being discussed when I think a few years ago we would have had a huge discussion about this. And I guess this means we're going in the right direction. And it is, they're all women and they're all characters, very much characters. And by the way, Abby being buff, I think it's also not being discussed, but she is so badass and physically badass, which is rare in games. And she's still very much of a woman, but she's impressive and she has weight. Like her whole physicality is something that I think we usually associate with men, especially in games or movies. And yet she's still very much a woman, and it shows that it can be done. And that not, I really appreciate the fact that, of course, she's not the only woman in the game. They remark on her, on her physique, on her physical strength, but it's not something that is the main focus of everything. And she's not the only woman. So it's not like, oh, women, in order to be badass, need to be physically buff like a man usually is. So, yeah, I really appreciated this. And I think it's interesting that thankfully it hasn't become the focus or a focus of this game and the thing people are talking about. The other thing I want to mention is that this is not Joel and Ellie's story, clearly. So in that sense, it's not a direct, well, it is a direct continuation of the first one, of course, but it's not their story, it's another story. And I think this created some issues with some of the gamers. We'll talk about in a little bit. And the last thing I want to say before I dive into the genre of the game is that about the duration. I think many people think it's too long. And I think there is some padding, maybe. The game is like 20 to 25 hours long. I think there's some padding. Yes. And at some points I was like, okay, they're adding an encounter here when there maybe didn't need to be one. Maybe. I don't think it's too long though, in the sense that maybe it could have been a couple of hours shorter, but you can't cut out a big part of it, because even the parts that you feel are long are imprint on you the feeling of what it is to live through this world and to live through these situations. And if you just play for a couple of hours of something and you're like, okay, I get it. You might get it like intellectually, you understand it, but you haven't lived through it. And I think that is an important part of the journey that the game takes you on. So a little bit of padding maybe, but I wouldn't like say it's too long. Because if you shorten it significantly, you don't have the same experience anymore. So those are general thoughts. Now, let's dive into the story and the genre. Um, so I would like to note that the story is something, the genre is something very rare in gaming, and that's a tragedy. I've seen it described as, compared to different movies and and I don't think anyone has mentioned that it's a tragedy. And almost every other game on this planet is either an action game or a puzzle game or a strategy game or that kind of thing. And they're all very based on gameplay. This one is nothing like that. It is maybe not 100%, but 95% a tragedy. And that is not something that you're supposed to enjoy in the sense that you enjoy a comedy or an action flick. You derive, it's not pleasure, but you derive something, I don't know how to describe it exactly, out of the sense of sadness and despair and maybe even helplessness that it creates in you. The closest comparison that I can find is Romeo and Juliet. I know it's been compared to many other works of art, but Romeo and Juliet is, in the purest sense, a tragedy. You are shown characters that you grow attached to, and in the end, when they could have been, there could have been happiness and joy and elation, there is needless death of both of them. It's not even, the if you don't know the story of Romeo and Juliet, look it up. But essentially, in the end, they didn't need to die, and they both die at their own hands. It is a horrendous story. It's horrible, and yet, we quote unquote enjoy it. To me, The Last of Us Part 2 is in that category. Of course, there are many other examples, but it is in that category. It's a tragedy. And I don't know who can say that this doesn't have value. It's not, obviously it is one of the main genres of storytelling that exists. And the fact that we have very rarely done this in gaming is striking, but also doesn't mean this doesn't have value. Or that the fact that it's not enjoyable is somehow the final knock against it. So, of course, the fact that it's a game means that they're making us do things that we don't want to do. And let's get a little bit more specific here. Even more than in the first one. I think the first one, there were some things that we didn't want to do, and it was really violent, but it's like the last scene of the first one where we don't want to do what Joel does, and we are forced to do it because that is what the game is about, but over the entire game almost. Of course, in that area, I think the thing that people will remember the most, and the visually, like the directing, the filmmaking almost technique, mastery that will stick with us for a very long time, is the scene where Ellie murders Nora, the one where with the red image of Ellie with her face contorted with anger and pain, and the game asking you to press the button. And you don't want to do that. Mostly, I'm guessing most of us don't want to do it. And yet we have to, just like we probably didn't want to kill the doctor as Joel in the last game, but we still did it. And the whole game is a little bit like this. Even when you kill a random character, a random enemy in the game, in an action encounter, if most of us have seen their face, where you kill them, you plant your knife in their throats, and their eyes are, it is horrendous. And it's there's still some level of ludonarrative dissonance where you don't want to kill people, but or when it doesn't matter that you kill people, as it is in, Uncharted, where you kill hundreds of enemies and then you try to save one person and it's like, oh no, someone's gonna die, but you've been killing people forever. In this one, of course, you kill a lot of people, but it always feels violent and kind of wrong in a way. So that not enjoying what you're doing is key, of course, and that scene in particular, Red Ellie, which is, I guess, how I'm gonna call it, is the epitome of that aspect of the game. And the other thing, which I think is essential, which I've been listening to people review the game and mostly the reactions on the internet. So, okay, I'm going to say one thing. There are a lot of people, apparently there's the whole review bombing thing about people being upset that Joel dies, which I'm guessing many people who are review bombing the game are, haven't played through it. They just hear, oh, what, Joel dies? We love Joel. He was... And that is, what is wrong with many things. But in this instance, the gamer anger culture, because I can guarantee you, which I have no idea about, but I'm pretty certain that most people who are angry about this and going on like, the gamer angers community action, and they are the same people who would be angry, quote unquote, at AAA games for doing always like grabbing for money and wanting to do sequels all the time that are the same, but just to get money from us. And big corporations are horrible, and we hate EA. And here is a giant AAA game that is doing something really different and really artistic, probably comparable to, it's a to a small extent, comparable to Red Dead Redemption 2, which was kind of a quadruple A indie game, as I put it. And people are like, oh no, this sucks because it's not what we wanted. And I'll get back to Joel in just a second. But the review of the game in general, there are a lot of people who seem to think that the two parts are not two parts in this game. Of course, in the beginning, you play as Ellie, and big spoiler here. When you're done with Ellie's journey, you start playing as Abby. And there's a whole 10, 12 hours when you play as Abby. And there's a lot of people that seem to characterize this second part where you play as Abby as a detour. They think, oh, we were having a story, and then just when we get to the conclusion of that story, with Ellie being confronted with Abby, which she's been chasing for the whole game at this point, they cut and tell us something that has no relationship with it. And that's frustrating for them, it seems. And that is the most unbelievably ridiculous thing I have ever heard in my life about anything. A little bit of emphasis here for effect. But obviously that story, that section with Abby is not a detour. It's not like another thing that the game is telling you. It's the whole point of the game. It is the entire reason why the game exists. The whole reason is that it puts you in the shoes of Ellie. It takes you through a specific intellectual path, and then it shows you something else which puts that last moment, that last confrontation, in a whole different context. And it wants to tell you, this is how you felt until now. and you have Abby barge into the theater and point a gun at Ellie, and you hate Abby, and you this is the moment that you've been dreading. You don't want that to happen. You've been trying to avoid. You hope that something happens to Abby and they somehow take her down. And throughout the next 10 hours, you put that moment in context and you have a different outlook on it. That is the whole point of the game. And by the way, time hops are key to this game. They might be a little bit confusing at some points, but they are this game. They are this piece of art. The entire idea of the game is to show you something, make you feel like you understand the state of mind of the protagonists, and then show it in a different light and make you feel like maybe there's another way of looking at it. If you if you listen to the Phileas Club, which is another show I do, I feel like to an extent this is kind of the Phileas Club, the game. This is exactly not exactly. This is somehow a little bit of what I tried to do with the Phileas Club, which is showing different perspectives on a situation that you are dead set on understanding in a specific way. The final Joel scene is another example. The then scene is another example of time hops being key to you understanding how things go. So this is really the theme of the game. The shifting perspectives is the theme of the game, and it does so in a very powerful way because you play through all of this. We've seen this in many other art forms. We've seen this in movies, in TV shows, in books, in many different art forms. But this one is special because you play through all of it. And so the way you experience it is particular and more strongly felt. I think the best example of this is actually Joel himself. Because in the first one, and this is what some people who probably haven't played the game are angry about. In the first one, you grow to love Joel and to value his relationship with Ellie and to understand why he did what he did. And you kind of, you go into his shoes and you are with him. Maybe you don't want to kill the doctor, but you don't want Ellie to die. You want to save her, no matter the cost, kind of, because you feel the way Joel feels. And then throughout this game, very early on, actually, you're taken out of that frame of mind. And you're looking at what Joel did and who Joel is with a little bit more of a neutral point of view. And you realize that he is a psychopath. Not a psychopath, but he's the biggest criminal the world has ever seen. He's worse than anything that has come before. Hitler, Stalin, Attila, throw in any dictator you've ever thought of. Like, he has doomed humanity. Everything that happens, every person that dies forever from that point on, because of the situation, not just the infected, but the situation, the apocalypse that the infected create, all of this is his fault. He is the worst person that has ever lived. And this is an incredible shift in perspective that, honestly, even though I knew, his choice was difficult in the first one, it was like, oh, but you doom humanity, ha ha ha, okay, but you save your adoptive daughter. And the bond between them is so incredible that, it's so beautiful. No, there is no, well, of course, there are ways of justifying what he did, but it's much more difficult than you felt in the first one. So this is the first major perspective shift. And because you played through all of this, it is much more deeply felt. And of course, the theme of this game, the main one, is the shifting perspectives between Ellie and Abby. In the first part, you go through all of the 3 days in Seattle as Ellie, and you feel justified in every action, that murderous action that you take. Of course, you understand it's destructive. You understand that Ellie is going down a dangerous path, But your concern is with what Ellie is doing to herself, mostly. And the people that you kill, those people on that list, the 8 people who were involved in killing Joel, you kind of, a part of you wants them to die. You are on a righteous path of revenge that we've been used to in many games. And there is very little that you feel pushes you psychologically, not the game, but pushes you towards saying, I don't want them to die. Maybe you don't want to kill them, but you understand why they would have to die because, of course, they killed Joel, and you're Ellie, and you have that connection. And of course, even more than that, even if you don't quite understand why she's being so adamant on it, it still feels a little bit strange that she has such rage and he has such anger, and she's going down that self-destructive path, even though it's clearly self-destructive. At the end of the game, you understand that the reason she's so consumed by all of this is that she was just about to find a way to healing her relationship with Joel. I don't think this is the strongest perspective shifting of the game. I think it explains it. It doesn't work as well as maybe some of the other perspective shifts of either game, but it's still something that kind of attempts to explain to you that internally she can't let it go, because what Abby did wasn't just give justice to herself, her dad, and the world. It took away that opportunity that Ellie had to regain the love of her adoptive father, of someone who was very dear to him, to kind of heal their relationship. And she was just ready to do it. And that opportunity was taken away from her. And she feels guilty and angry about all of this. And that is what leads her down that path. So, of course, the first part of the game is we want Abby's group to die. But the second part of the game is, and I think this is where it doesn't work for some people. And again, I don't understand how it could not work, because on me, it completely worked perfectly, which is they put you in Abby's shoes. And of course, they explain that's when we discover that Abby's dad was a doctor, which she has a personal stake in that incident that happened at the hospital, on top of the, humanity's stake. And we also understand that not only did Joel take Ellie away, but he also killed the only brain surgeon that exists that could have done this. Maybe there's another one somewhere, but it's not surprising to hear that they don't have that many brain surgeons around to save humanity anymore. So it is even more heinous of a crime that Joel did. And so, more importantly, we go through Abby's journey on those 3 days, and with some time hops, and we come to understand and care for the characters that are in her group. And if that didn't work for you, if you still thought, they don't matter, then of course the whole game crumbles. The game doesn't work. And I mean, it's like games are like anything else. Some people like some things, some people don't like the same things and like something else. You don't get angry at something because they don't like curry. You don't get angry at something because they don't like broccoli at someone. Some people like something, some people don't. It's fine. You don't yell at someone on the internet because they don't like chicken and you like chicken, or because they like chicken and you don't. Of course, some people are going to like this game, some people are not going to like this game. And I think the key reason why you might not like this game is because the second part doesn't work for you. And I don't understand it, but I understand it. It's fine. But to me, it works so well that I cared about every one of those people that I didn't care about before. Especially Owen and Mel, of course. They're the ones that we spend the most time with, and they are full-fledged humans that care about things. And they're good people in the end. They spare as many people as they can, especially Ellie. They went on a path of justice. Abby wanted revenge, but it was justified by the fact that it was justice. Ellie just wants revenge, and she is indiscriminate in killing those people that we now care about. And of course, there are a lot of parallels and mirrors and contrasts between the two. Many things are mirrored in the two stories, and I won't go into those things because it would take even longer to discuss than this. But it is which is the key. You care about those people, and when you play as Ellie and you get into that aquarium and you kill the damn dog that jumps on you after many other dogs have jumped on you, and then you kill Owen and Mel, it is tragic. And of course, this is when Ellie finally breaks down. But there's still those people that, oh, well, yeah, she's pregnant. Oh my God, I killed a pregnant lady. Maybe I shouldn't have done that, but I killed Owen, that's fine, the dog, whatever. But when you enter that aquarium as Abby, and you know what's going to happen, you know what you're going to find there, you're horrified, and you don't want to step into that room. You feel that intense tragedy, the inevitability of all of this. And by the way, about perspectives, Joel is kind of worse than Thanos almost. And you spend, of course, the whole first movie in the Infinity War duology understanding maybe why Thanos does what he does. Not quite emphasizing with him as much as you do with Joel, but it's an interesting thing. And I think, of course, Joel is, well, Thanos did it on a cosmic scale, but Joel dooms everyone. So anyway, who's worse, Thanos or Joel? You can have your debate on that very important point. But so you do, as Abby, you don't want to. There's the tragedy of that you feel because you know what's going to happen, and that is, and you don't want to enter. It is so powerful. And then when you get back to the theater where you find Ellie, finally that perspective has shifted to an extent. You don't feel about this situation as much as the same way you did 10 hours earlier. When you first encountered Abby, finally, you were on the side of Ellie. And now, at the very least, you're mixed. And sometimes, I think for me even, I was on the side of Abby. She did arguably nothing wrong. She was merciful, even. This is that situation where she points the gun at Ellie is you almost, I mean, you don't want her to kill Ellie, but you don't want Ellie to kill her either. It is putting that situation in such a stark contrast. And then, of course, Ellie is the boss that you have to fight in that scene, that hand-to-hand combat scene. And you want to prevail as Abby, which again is a feat of incredible proportions that not only had you spent the previous 10 hours or 12 hours playing as Ellie and feeling justified in your revenge to an extent, but you also had the entire first game where you played as Ellie and learned to care for her. So the fact that in the middle of the second game, you play as Abby and you're like, man, I don't know about that Ellie girl. I don't know if I want her to survive, it's not just that you don't want the character to survive or you want to beat her, you want them to be both safe. It's that the game takes you through that journey and makes you feel those things where you are challenging your own views of everything, of situations, of the world. And this is something that a game can, I don't think a movie does it in the same way. I don't know if it's better or worse to experience it as a passive observer. Obviously, I love movies and they have a huge amount of value, but having played through it yourself in a game, it is a unique way of delivering that art, that sensation. So it is that which to me, and I think clearly, is the key of the game. And it is a masterful thing. Um, I'm going to get back to a little bit of those big shifts, but I want to talk about the conclusion of the game, the last 3 hours. I have to say, I when we finished the Abbey path and we get back to Ellie and Dina in the farm, I was praying that the game wasn't over. And of course, the game plays with you on that front. And Neil Druckmann and Naughty Dog make you feel at multiple points in that section that this is it. When Ellie gets the baby and sits on the tractor and tells the baby, "Oh, I'm going to have so many things to tell you, so many stories to tell you." I was thinking, no, don't end it here. I need something else. I need something more. And it really clearly pans to that setting sun, and you feel, oh, this is going to be it. But no, it isn't, of course. And you have the additional part, which shows you that really Ellie cannot let it go and has to lose everything, not just some of her, but everything, in order, or maybe she doesn't have to, but she does. It doesn't stop there because and we're shown this with PTSD and that moment where we go to, get the sheep back in the barn. You feel that something bad is going to happen. And there's the PTSD moment, and we're worried. And, of course, everything else happens afterwards. But the other message there is that revenge is so destructive. It leaves nothing behind. Even the Seraphite Island is an apocalyptic event. And this is prophesized in the song that Joel sings to Ellie, of course, at the beginning of the game. The song which says, "If I lose you, I will surely lose myself." And she loses herself. And not only does she lose herself, she loses everything and causes others to lose everything. Everyone dies, almost. But really, and then they die in the most pointless ways often. They're just in the path of a bullet. They're dead, and that's it. People we care about. But there's a point to this. Revenge is so destructive for herself, of course, but for everyone else. And it has to be complete for her to... So I think the game is much more relentless than the first one. We are bathed into that relentlessness forever. In the first one, there was some of that, of course, a lot of it. But there were things to hold on to. There were hopeful moments. There were moments that you could grab onto and think, yes, there is beauty somewhere in this world. I don't think this one does this almost at all. There's also the part that I think it retcons a little bit of Ellie's story, or at least the way I saw the end of the first game, where my understanding was that Ellie knew that Joel was lying to her, but she was accepting to accept it. And I think deep down on some level, she kind of knew, which is also why she is so angry with all of this, because she's also angry with herself. But that's my interpretation to try and safeguard my view of the first one. But this is a relentless story. And unlike the first one, as I was saying, there's very little to hold on to. The ultimate path and the conclusion of that conclusion is that she has to maybe not forgive Abby, but accept that this is the situation, accepting of the situation, and she has to let it go. And of course, this is illustrated by the fact that this image of Joel was that she was ready to accept that this is what he did and accept him, even though this is what she did, accept the situation. And this is the path that she couldn't conclude with Joel, and she has to conclude it with Abby, with, of course, that last fight, where you definitely, if in the theater you weren't sure who you wanted to win, quote unquote, I think in that fight on the beach in the water, you just want them to stop. You want both of them to stop this. This is a horrendous unfolding of a situation that you don't want to keep happening. It is so senseless because of the corrosiveness of that revenge. And she has to literally lose everything and be, of course, we understand that she has lost Dina. She has lost all of her friends. She has lost herself. She is physically destroyed and reach rock bottom of everything in order to maybe decide that it's not worth it. I suppose I'm kind of working through this part with you. Maybe I didn't think about it to a satisfying conclusion, but I think the way I understand it is she has to hit rock bottom and decide at that point, I don't want to keep going down that path because there's nothing there, maybe, or I have to get out of this. And the only way of getting out of it is accepting it and maybe letting her go and letting go of that revenge, which is what she does. And there are so many incredible scenes that hinge on that idea of shifting perspectives. Of course, Yara and Lev, the scenes. I mean, even as scenes, cinematic action things, the running in the darkness with Yara and Lev is incredible. There's on a design level, the shotgun to Joel's knee is so sudden, and the game manages to surprise you over and over again with some of these things when you know that this is what it's based on. And they're I mean, of course, there is shock value to them, but it is like the perspective of that shotgun to Joel's knee is that you can't believe he is not going to survive in this game. He is the hero of the first one. And the shotgun to the knee it's impossible to recover from. I mean, he's going to lose that leg. They show you very clearly, graphically, he can't recover from this. And it's kind of indicating to you that he's probably going to die. There's no recovering from this to an extent. And that is an incredible cinematic scene. The sniper scene from a gameplay and shifting perspective point of view is amazing. Of course, it's been discussed by many reviewers, you hate that sniper because of what it does to you from a gameplay perspective. You want to get there. You don't know who he is. You want to get there and put a bullet in his head. Of course, not in the real world sense, but in a gameplay sense, you want to end that encounter and shoot that enemy. And of course, then you see that, it is Tommy, and you're taken aback a little bit. Another beautiful scene, of course, is the museum scene with Ellie and Joel, with the dinosaurs and the space thing, which is reminiscent of the expansion of The Last of Us 1, which, by the way, it seems they're not working on an expansion for this one, which I can understand. But that scene where she travels to space is so incredible. And, of course, the relationship between Abby and Yara and Lev is, I think, reminiscent of the first game, and it shows that there is some maybe hope there, a little bit, the shred of hope that we have in this second game, but it puts her on the path that Joel was on to an extent. She's very comparable to Joel, Abby, in this one. And that is also a perspective on the Seraphites, which, of course, are still, by and large, incredibly hateable group, but that shows you, well, there are individuals in this, and it's not, they're not all. And then you explore their island, and you see there aren't just fighters. There are a lot of people who just live there. And anyway, so that's another one of the perspective shifting things. Overall, let's this has been almost an hour. I think the game deserves it, absolutely. But let's get to a conclusion. This is an incredible work of art, and I understand that not everyone will like it. It is absolutely not for everyone. I think if you don't get into what's happening with Abby, obviously the game is not going to work for you, because this is the entire game. The main perspective shifting thing is hating Abby's group with Ellie and loving or caring for those same people with Abby. And that is the key of the game. If that doesn't work for you, of course, the game is only a series of senseless killings. But for me, it absolutely worked. I think it's something that only a game could do in that way. I think it's something that almost no other game has ever done. You could argue there are some games that are tragedies. I think maybe What Remains of Edith Finch could be described as a tragedy. There might be others. But this is very rare. And to that extent, in that way, I don't think it really exists. And this is valuable in that sense. And it is a way that, we keep talking about video game as art. And there are certainly examples of video game as art, many examples. But often people think of video games as art and think of indie projects or atypical projects in their presentation or in their that kind of almost try to get away a little bit from the video game-ness, or try to take a stab at the industry by being an indie project that says, I don't like the way things are done in the video game space as a whole. I think this one is unapologetically a AAA production. It is a big studio, and it says it's essentially a blockbuster movie that is also a great director's movie. And there are many of those, of course, but I don't think we have a lot of those in the video game space. And for that alone, it's commendable. But beyond that, the way it makes you think about perspectives and revenge and what you want to, the way you look at things is the best thing that a piece of art can do. So, yeah, there's still a lot to unpack here. I'm sure I'm going to keep thinking about it, as I said, for many, many weeks and months. And we'll see what happens towards the end of the year, if it is in the end my game of the year. There are still many other games that are coming out, of course. But it is an impactful game. It is not enjoyable in the traditional game sense, but it is so impactful, and I can't get it out of my head. I think it is powerful. And I'm very glad that it exists and that I got to play through it. So, yeah, those are my impressions on The Last of Us Part 2. If you want more from me, please feel free to go to Twitter, Facebook, or Instagram. I'm not Patrick on all of those platforms. And we'll be back for another episode in a little while, a week or so. I hope you have a wonderful time today, and I will talk to you